Hello and good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. Welcome everyone to the first in a new series of webinars provided by Ingent Connect, which, as you will know, is one of the UK's leading portals for scholarly content. My name is Byron Russell and I'll be introducing the webinar this afternoon. Many thanks to all of you for joining us today, and most of all, thanks very much to our guest speaker, Lorraine Estelle, who we're really delighted to have with us. Lorraine is Project Director for Counter. She leads and coordinates the Counter's working groups, who represent librarians and publishers. Lorraine has a wealth of experience in the information industry, with a background in libraries, consortia, shared services and publishing. She was Chief Executive of JISC Collections from 2006 to 2015, working closely with publishers and librarians on all aspects of national procurement and licensing activities. Of particular relevance to Counter was her role in setting up the UK Journal Usage Statistics Portal, JUSP, which provides a one-stop shop for management of Counter usage stats by UK academic libraries. The Counter Technical Subgroup has been working for the last year to develop Release 5 of the Counter Code of Practice. This new release which will be published in July this year, is a radical update which will provide greater clarity and consistency in the counting and reporting of usage statistics. In the webinar today, Lorraine will explain why the new code of practice is necessary, the main features and how they differ to and from the current release, the consultation feedback and how it's been addressed, and finally, the timeline for implementation and support for publishers and libraries. There will be time at the end of the session for questions and answers. Please use the chat room, the text box that you'll be able to see on the right-hand side of the screen, for putting any questions to Lorraine. So enough of me, and let me hand you over now to Lorraine Estelle.
Hello, can you all hear me? Thank you very much for, thank you, I'm glad you can all hear, thank you. Thank you all very much for joining this afternoon to find out more about Counter Code of Practice, Release 5. And thanks also to Byron and his colleagues at Ingenta for facilitating this webinar. I'm very grateful to them. Just a few words about the presentation. I'm trying as much as is possible with usage statistics not to use too much unexplained jargon. If I do slip into that, please give me a prompt in the chat box and I will try to address it. And of course, I also welcome your questions, which we'll answer later on. I'm sure that many of you who have joined today are familiar with counter usage statistics and already using Release 4 reports. And I've called this presentation Now for Something Different because Counter Release 5 is quite different in many ways from Release 4 and addresses many of the issues that that we've had with Release 4. So to move on, first of all, to talk about why we needed to do a new release. When we did the consultation about Release 5, one librarian wrote to me and said, you keep changing it. Well, in fact, of course, Release 4 has been with us for a long time. And a lot of things have evolved since then. Functionality on platforms has changed considerably. And of course, there are many differences between platforms. So we really did need to address those changes that have happened in technology to make sure that counter reports remain consistent and comparable across all the different vendors and take into account the different functionalities they have introduced. But there were some other reasons as well. Um, the release 4 is quite complex, quite difficult to understand. Um, and really, we have to spend quite a lot of time explaining and resolving issues. And also, as we'll look at later on as we go through, there are inconsistencies in release 4, and those we have aimed to address in release 5. So we believe a very necessary change that had to happen. And we've had really over the past year, rather more than a year, a technical subgroup working on release 5. And that subgroup has representatives from the library community. We have librarians from the UK, from Germany, from where else? From France on there. And we also have publishers and vendors as well. So we've been really able to work together in a very collaborative way to address the changing needs, to reduce the complexity. And the working group have been very mindful that we want to achieve in Release 5 a code of practice that ensures that all publishers and all content providers are able to comply. Back in 2015, I ran a consultation across libraries across the world. And one of the things that they said that was needs to be a driver for Counter was really making sure that all publishers and content providers were compliant with the code of practice. So we hope that we have achieved something that will enable that. Now, we'll move on and talk a little bit about Release 5 itself. And as I said, it is completely different, a really different way of thinking about how information is collected on usage and how it is reported. And at the heart of Release 5 are 4 master reports: the Platform Master Report, Database Master Report, Title Master Report, and Item Master Report. So those are the foundation really for everything that follows. The idea of the master reports is to create a data set around usage, which the users, the libraries of that, the libraries who use that data can filter in order to get to the information that they need for decision making. Now, the slide in front of you, I must emphasize here, is for illustrative purposes only. This doesn't exist yet, but it is a mock-up of an interface that it would be very straightforward to build on top of those master reports. And you can see here that the librarian could filter on usage dates, metric types, data types, access methods, and year of publication. And we'll talk about what those mean. But the idea, as I say, is that those master reports that will contain a lot of information could easily be filtered down to give the users of the report information that they require. And of course, that may vary from time to time depending on the decision making, the planning that the librarians are undertaking. But having said all that about the master reports, the heart of Release 5, they provide a very straightforward environment. But in our consultation earlier this year with libraries, there was also a need expressed to have something perhaps rather more similar to the reports that you are familiar with at the moment. So we have created standard views, if you like, from the master reports, which address the most common use cases. And we'll have a look at those in a moment. And you can see here from the from the platform master report, we get the platform usage report. From the database master report, the database search and item usage, and then the database access denied. And from the title master reports, book requests, book accesses, book usage access by type, and again, as you can see, similar for journals, but also a report which perhaps is more similar to the JR5 you may be familiar with on year of publication. And then on the item master report, journal article request by item and multimedia item request. So we'll have a look at those standard views in a bit more detail now. So here you can see, oops, sorry, I managed to pick up a pencil. Here you can see the database master report, which would enable the librarians to analyze database performance with searches and activity related to abstracts and full text. The title master report, the book views, will enable librarians to compare usage of acquired books, regardless of how those books are delivered. Again, some of you will be familiar at the moment. We have a BR1 report, which is about books that are delivered in their entirety. We have BR2, which are about books that are delivered in sections. That can be quite confusing and unhelpful distinction in the modern age. So the new reports behave rather differently in those distinctions. While you can still find the difference, you don't need two reports to have a look. The journal reports, again, rather like the JR1, usage for subscribed journals, and these are the reports that you would use particularly for the cost per use analysis. And as I mentioned earlier, the journal request by year of publication. This is very similar to the JR5 report and takes a closer look at subscribed journals by year of publication. And that's quite important when, for example, you have a license for a publisher's current content and you have another license for the publisher's archival content, and you want to see where the usage is coming from. So a very useful report from that perspective. And the item report analyzes usage of items, obviously, but I think this multimedia one is going to be very, very important because it analyzes usage of multimedia content at the item level. Oh, okay, Kelly's just said, can I speak closer to the mic? Kelly, is that better? I hope so. Yes, so the multimedia item report also very useful for platforms which have both journal content and multimedia, for example, not only for multimedia only platforms. Now this, and it can be a little bit off-putting when you haven't seen it before, is an example of a standard view from the title master report. So sort of familiar, but a little bit different from the reports that you are used to seeing. One of the things that's quite important about these, oh, good, Kelly says yes, but I'll stay where I am so you can hear me, is that we have standard headings regardless of format type. These columns, as you can see, they're pretty familiar. There's not much to say here. But here you will see something that looks quite different. We have consistent metric types across all formats, across journals, books, multimedia, databases, and so on. And that's quite an important difference between the current release, release 4, and release 5. And we'll have a look at those metrics now in a bit more detail. So we have metric types and we also have related attributes. Now, in our current release here, release 4, we have 25 metric types which you have to deal with. And I know you're all familiar with them, but if you take a closer look, you will see that many of the metric types are associated with format. So we have the obvious ones, HTML, PDF, and then we have HTML mobile, and so on. If you also look at, it gets a bit confusing, we have multimedia, but we also have video, image, audio, and so on. So very, very, as I say, format specific, but also a little bit confusing sometimes. So now we have in release 5 just 12 metric types, so fewer metric types. Now, when I first, when our working group first came up with these new metric types, I was a little confused. I must say, I couldn't quite understand the difference between investigations and requests. So it does take a while to get your head around this, but once you do, I think it's a very helpful distinction. And one of the reasons it's very helpful is because, as I mentioned before, we had a problem, or we have, I should say, a problem with release 4 because of the way that different platforms operate. And you will all be aware some platforms take the users directly to the HTML full text rather than to the abstract. So there is some confusion sometimes around whether a user is investigating or whether the user actually wants and requests that text. So now all those metrics have gone, and we have these new ones, investigations and requests. And I found this little diagram, which was created by the chair of the technical group, Oliver Pesch, very helpful in working it all out. So the little here in blue, we have the actions that a user would take when they're investigating some content. They haven't decided that they want it yet, but they are investigating it. And then we have the request. They have actively requested some text, HTML, PDF, or in the case of multimedia, to view some content. And in the processing for release 5, a view of an HTML and a PDF in the same session are one request. Sorry. In addition to the metric types, we have introduced additional attributes. And the idea of these attributes is to really allow the users of the reports to drill down into the detail. Now, of course, you might not always want that detail, and that's the idea of the filtering of the reports in that mock-up of the interface I showed you. But I think the attributes will be very important in analyzing the value and user behavior. The first one, which we call data type, identifies the general type of content being accessed and what is being reported. So an article, a book segment, and so on. One I would point out here that is going to be very useful, I think, is the newspaper data type. That was a problem in release 4. It was quite difficult. There wasn't really anything that worked particularly well with newspapers. So this will, I think, will be a welcome addition. And you can see here, we also have repository items. And I would say that one of the things about release 5 is that it's very much geared not only to working with commercially provided content, but also with content accessed from institutional repositories and subject repositories. And these repository items are very important data types in that respect. Then we have the section types. So this is where we're talking about content which is delivered in chunks. I'm not sure that chunks is a terribly technical word, but it's the one we could come up with. So again, you can see a chunk might be an article, it might be a book, it might be a book chapter, or a section of some type. And this attribute is an optional parameter for the title master report because that doesn't always apply in every case. Now, a great deal of our consultation about Release 5 focused on access types. What we have in Release 5 at its launch in July are three active access types. Controlled, and controlled really is really everything that you pay for through your license for the content. OA Gold, that is content which is open access because an article processing charge has been paid. On repositories, we also have other free to read because, of course, neither controlled or OA Gold really apply to repositories. And we have OA delayed. Now, OA delayed is something I know a lot of librarians would like to see. And what we mean by OA delayed is content that becomes open access after an embargo period. So typically, perhaps it might be behind the paywall for 1 year or 2 years and then becomes open. Now, we wanted initially to include it in the release at the very beginning, but some publishers have a difficulty in tracking and reporting on OA delayed. So although it's in release 5, it's there for future use. And once we have published release 5, we will be putting together another working group or a subgroup to really work on that in more detail, and that's something we will implement going forward. We also have access methods, and that is to distinguish between regular user-driven access and text and data mining. Now, I do want to assure you all, text and data mining use will not be included in your standard report, but it will be recorded and can be reported on where you want to see it. And increasingly, libraries want to understand about text and data mining because, of course, that provides enormous value sometimes to their researchers. Again, it's an optional parameter in the master report, but I think increasingly it will be something that people are interested in seeing. And as I say, year of publication, and this is a very, very important metric where you can really understand where the usage is coming from in terms of year of publication. As I said before, so that you can distinguish between, in particular, content that is under a current license and content that you have licensed separately as an archive. Now, now we've looked at the metric types and attributes, we'll have a closer look at the report format. Now, these formats here on the screen will be familiar to you because these are Release 4 formats. And they have a number of issues with them. The first one here you can see in the journal report. In the Excel version of a journal report, the PDF, it has the PDF and HTML totals But in the Sushi version, if you have the XML version, it breaks them out by month. So depending on how you download your reports, you will get an inconsistency there. And here down here we have a database report, and again you can see that we use a different vocabulary in the different reports. But now we will have a consistent vocabulary across all the reports. So the new reports look like this, and you will see we have a consistent header. Now we're looking at a journal report here, but we'll have the same header, whether it's a journal report, database report, etc. We have consistent detail along the columns. They will be the same across all reports. And as I said, we have the consistent vocabulary across all reports. Perhaps not so relevant for some for librarians in some countries. For example, here in the UK, you have just the journal's usage statistics portal, but in many countries there isn't that sort of shared service. So individual libraries or library consortia will be downloading using Sushi the reports themselves. And a feature of Release 5 is a change to a RESTful interface returning JSON formatted reports. Now, I hope you're not going to ask me any very technical questions about this because it's not really my area. But if you do, let me have them and I will get back to you with the answers. But I think this is good news because the JSON format is familiar to most web developers, and really I think it's much easier to implement. So I think if you are implementing Sushi, this will be good news. Now, as I said, we had a great deal of consultation really across the world with librarians, with publishers, with vendors about Release 5. And we published the first draft back in January. And as I say, we got a lot of comments. Many of those comments we have addressed, but there are a few we haven't been able to address. And we've had to take slightly new approaches. So I'm just going to run through those with you so you can see how we got to where we are, if you see what I mean. Now, I've mentioned the year of publication already. In the first draft of Release 5, which we put up for consultation, we had a metric type called isArchive. And the idea is that that would be a metric type so you could see instantly if content had come from archival content under one license or whether it was usage was coming from current content. Now, unfortunately, this was a great idea and would have made life very simple, but many publishers do not implement their archival business models in a way that makes this easy to implement. What is an archive in one country is not necessarily an archive in another country, and this is why we have gone to the year of publication. If any of you saw the first draft, you will have seen we got quite granular on the open access, and we had OA Gold APC and OA Gold non-APC. And this was because some journals are supported by their societies, sometimes called platinum journals. So the authors do not have to pay article processing charges. But really our feedback on that level of granularity was that it wasn't really helpful. It would just make the reports bigger and more complicated. So we have listened to the feedback there and that's been removed. We also hope to include other free to read across all content types, from commercial providers of content as well as repositories. And what we had in mind there was content which is free to read because a publisher is promoting a new journal and makes it open access for an initial period, or perhaps make some content free to read in response to an international emergency or so on. But again, the feedback from the publishers was that it was very difficult for them to track and report on, particularly because content that's free to read is often free to read only for a while, and then it changes again to behind the paywall. So we were not able to do that for practical reasons. OA delayed, again, I explained to you, OA delayed was the one which we know libraries want. We know that you want to see this post-embargo open access content, and that is what we're going to be working on for the future. And as I said, the feedback was the master reports are lovely, lots and lots of detail, but we really want the standard views so that we can focus on those use cases, and that's why we have introduced those. So the standard views are really sort of subsets, if you like, of the master views, master reports for that analysis that the library wants to undertake. The other thing that we heard from everybody really when we published the first draft of the of Release 5 was a confusion about investigations and requests. So we have created a graphic and we've created some explanatory text, and I hope my explanation was clearer. If it wasn't, please do let me know, because it is very important that we address that and make sure everybody understands. There was concern about HTML and PDF and the transition from Release 4 to Release 5 has addressed this through the inclusion of a section in the Code of Practice that specifically provides a mapping from the R Release 4 metrics to the equivalent Release 5 metrics. And there will also be some overlap during the implementation of Release 5, which will allow libraries to look at the difference when we move to investigations and requests and away from HTML and PDF. Now, having told you about the things that we did address directly, there were some comments which we were not able to really address, or not to address directly. And I will put my hand up about those and just tell you about them as well. Many libraries told us that they wanted sessions as a metric type. They wanted to know about sessions. But we looked at this very closely. But modern interfaces make sessions very, very difficult to capture. And we realized that if we did make sessions a requirement, it was very likely that it would be interpreted inconsistently. So therefore, we have not included sessions in Release 5. Again, I think this was perhaps a particular request from librarians in the US, but there was a request to output the report header in the reports onto a separate tab. Now, we can't do that because when reports are downloaded as TSV files, there are no tabs. But what we have done is ensure that the R5 reports have a blank row before the report body, and this enables the user to sort and filter and to generate pivot tables. So the header is no longer an issue. And you can also in Excel or in Google Sheets you can freeze the header row, and that makes it easier to compensate for that. And we will as well provide some library guides, which I hope will address that as well and make that clearer. Now, perhaps one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest problems in creating Release 5 was about the no reporting of zero usage. Now, of course, this is terribly important for librarians. They want to know about the content that is used, of course, but also they want to know about the content which they have paid for and which isn't being used. And again, we've spent a lot of time looking at the reporting of zero usage. The problem is that not all publishers, in fact, I would say many publishers, produce their counter reports using a different system from the systems they use to manage their access control. So what this means is when you run a report with zeros, you get hundreds and hundreds of rows of zero, because the report is not just about the content that the library subscribes to, it's also all the content on the publisher's platform. So the reports become enormous, and they're also not very helpful because it's zero use of everything on that platform, not just what you're paying for. However, we do recognize that it is a very important issue and it needs to be addressed. So we are working with NISO on an initiative referred to as the KBART automation for sushi harvesting of both usage and entitlement. And this is an automated way using sushi to get both counter reports and entitlement reports and somehow meshing the two together. That work is ongoing. Oliver Pesch, again, who is chair of Counter and who chaired the technical working group, is on that committee, and I know that they're working very hard to find a resolution. And I've already addressed this, but I will just mention it again. One of the issues that came back very loud and clear from libraries was this issue about no longer having Journal Title Report 5, a really important report at the moment for decision making, for understanding the use of the big deal really, and for understanding use of archival content. But that is why the year of publication metric can be applied to provide that detail, which will help libraries analyze usage on that level. Again, it's not an issue all around the world, but Release 5 no longer makes consortium reports mandatory. Of course, publishers can provide them, but it's not mandatory. And this was really because some vendors cannot provide consortium reports to all consortia due to the size. So what we are doing instead is we are trying to create some open source tools that will provide consortium administrators with the ability to generate consolidated usage reports for their consortium members. That work is underway at the moment, and I hope shortly to be able to provide some more news on that. But again, something that we're working on very hard. So a little bit about where we are and the next steps. As I say, we have been working on the design and the development of Release 5 for quite a considerable time now. And in January, we released the first draft of the Code of Practice and really had fantastic feedback from all our stakeholders and really from all around the world. And that feedback was very, very helpful and enabled us to review and to revise and I think improve the release 5. And then in April, we published the second draft of release 5, and we haven't had very many comments back on that. In fact, the comments we've had have been quite positive. So I think that really does mean, unless we hear anything in the next week, that we have really addressed those issues as much as we can that came up in the first draft. So in July this year, we will publish release 5 of the Counter Code of Practice. Now, what this means is that we will be asking publishers and vendors to implement the new Code of Practice from January 2019, which means that librarians will be running their first Counter Release 5 reports in February 2019. So the publishers and vendors have 18 months in which to make the adjustments that are required to comply with Release 5. It is quite a big change, as I say. It's a big change in terms of the metric types. It's a big change in the report formats, and of course the sushi to deliver those reports in an automated way. However, many of the underlying processes in terms of counting and what we expect when the publishers are audited are not changing dramatically. But nonetheless, we must recognise publishers and vendors do need to make an investment, and they will need time to implement Release 5. So that is why we have that 18-month period. We are supporting them as much as we can. We will be publishing in the next couple of weeks implementation guides for the vendors and publishers, and we will also be providing them with a timeline and guidance on how they do the transition from Release 4 to Release 5. We have set up an implementation working group, which publishers and vendors are invited to join so that they can post questions and we can share them across the whole group. And we will also be aiming to support libraries in understanding and using the new reports. As I say, we're creating some tools to help consortia harvest the reports, and we will be providing guides for libraries, and we will be doing some training webinars as well. So that is the plan. Oh, just a couple of other things I forgot to mention. Just to tell you as well, sorry, we also have a free, for publishers to use in consortia, a report validation tool for Release 4. We will be updating that for Release 5 so that as publishers and vendors implement Release 5, they can test their reports against the validation tool, and indeed as can libraries as well. And that will help them pick up errors much more quickly and address them. The other thing, just to note, that we will introduce with Release 5 is date-stamped counter logos. As I said to you, a lot of feedback from libraries is that they really want to see compliance by publishers and vendors and to know that they are really compliant. So with Release 5, you will see that publishers who pass a counter audit will be able to proudly display a dated counter logo, and that is the date that they had their audit. So that will be a really good guide, I think, for libraries and reassure them that the publisher or vendor is truly counter compliant. Anyway, I see I have been speaking for 45 minutes. I hope you're still all there. And I'd very much welcome your questions or your comments. Does anyone have any questions or comments, perhaps, for the chat box?
I could see that Julianne was about to type a question there.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yes, that's a good question, Julianne. Thank you very much. How do you differentiate between standard access and TDM access? The TDM access that we're talking about in the attribute I was talking about is for TDM where a researcher has gone to the publisher and said, I want to undertake text and data mining on your content, and it has been agreed. So therefore, the agent that the researcher is using for that mining will be known to the publisher. They will give the publisher the robot's name, if you like. So that is how it would be differentiated. But also, Julianne, I would say within the code of practice, we have quite careful information for publishers as well to recognize and to eliminate rogue usage. And we publish a list on the Counter website of the known robots that they should eliminate from the reports that you receive.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. We've got a question now from Kelly Andrus.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Do I have a sense that most librarians will use the new request stats rather than the investigations to calculate their cost per use? I think that's a really, really good question, Kelly. I think at the moment, certainly what we heard prior to starting on Release 5 and during the consultation period is many librarians were completely discounting HTML stats when they were analyzing for cost per use. And that was because of that difference in the platforms. So they very much felt that the HTML was very often double counting, if you like, PDF use. So I think librarians will be able to have much more confidence because of the new metrics and because of the rules that we've put on about not double counting those in Release 5. How much will they use the requests? I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean, it will be interesting to see. I mean, requests will be very important, I think, perhaps more on the database reports. But nonetheless, I think it's useful to have it, and I think it will help people understand user behavior. So, but I think requests will be the thing that they'll want to look at first, for sure.
We have a question from Louise Klein.
Our multimedia turnaway is going to be recorded in Release 5. They should be recorded, yes, in the master reports. I must confess, Louise, I'm going to have to check if they're going to be in the standard views. If I might, I'll check that and I will come back via Byron with that, if that's okay.
Now we have a question from Judith Phillips.
Right. Some publishers may have more data types than you have listed. Is there some guidance as to how these data types should be mapped to counter data types so that you know what metrics to use? I think we have included the main ones, and we also, Judith, have other. But one of the things that we are doing in Release 5, which thank you for reminding me I should have mentioned, is we are moving to a process of continuing maintenance. So we do not plan to have another huge release, but we would go to, for example, 5.1, 5.2. So we didn't get any feedback in the consultation with people asking for more data types. But because we are going to this continuous maintenance state, we could certainly and very easily introduce more data types if they were a requirement. So if there are some that you can think of that you would like to see, do let us know. Oh yes, absolutely. Conference papers. Yeah. That's a very good point, actually, Judith. It didn't really come up in the consultation, but it is a point that I'm going to make a note of, because that is an important one. But as I say, we certainly have other for the time being. Conference papers could be very useful. Okay.
Okay, does anyone have any final questions for Lorraine?
It doesn't look like it, does it, Byron? Just to say to people, if these are the links for draft 2 of of release 5, you can get to them from the counter website, or if you are, or you can go to the uses website, where again you can have a look. And as I say, we will be publishing the final version in July. And my email address is there again if people have any questions that occur to them later.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed, Lorraine, Estelle, for a really interesting presentation this afternoon, and thanks very much to all of you for attending. This webinar has been recorded, and the webinar will be available in full on the Ingenta Connect YouTube channel. We'll send details of the link to all participants after the webinar.
Thank you, and thank you everybody so much for listening. Thank you.